Okay, another question from a campus. How do you deal with somebody who says, I've been through immense suffering or trauma, and I just can't believe in a God, the God you talk about who loves me if he would let this happen to me? Because I meet that a lot.
Yeah.
But
I think that's the number one question, Joe. And whoever has asked this question, somebody has said virtue in distress and vice in triumph has made atheists of mankind. Virtue in distress and vice in triumph has made atheists of mankind. It's a daunting question. You know, sometimes, Joe, I think about when I go onto a campus or whatever, sometimes people almost think like you're an answering machine. You don't think of these things. We do think, as you as a pastor well know, because you minister to people in their most broken condition, and oftentimes you just walk away from there with tears in your own eyes. Now, I want you to know I'm not just talking out of a vacuum of philosophical understanding. I'm talking out of a life that has lived through a lot of pain, I was in my 20s when I lost my mother, and if it were not for my mother, I wouldn't have made it. I would not have made it. She's the only one who had the hope that somehow I could be rescued in life. And to lose her that early was hard. I lost my dad 5 years after that. And in the 1980s, I injured my back very badly. And I've had 2 major heart surgeries. As I stand before you, I have 2 titanium rods in my back that goes from L3 to S1, and I'm bolted down with 8 screws and 4 clamps. And for years and years and years, I would wake up and I would never know how the morning was going to be. I remember the days I'd sit in my car with the steering wheel in front of me. I'd park, put my head on the steering, and just cry in agony. The pain was just so bad. Any one of you who's had serious back issues, you know how psychologically and emotionally debilitating it can be. So I'm talking to you not out of the theoretical side. But let me move now to the theoretical side and then get to the applicational side. C.S. Lewis used to say this: no question has really been fully comprehended until it has been fully posed and its assumptions understood. No question has been comprehended until its assumptions have been understood after it has been fully posed. So, if a person, for example, says, I don't believe in God because there is too much evil in this world. I've had that said to me in a university setting in Nottingham. I've used that illustration so many times. A guy stood up and said, too much of evil in this world, there's no God. And I said, you don't believe that? He said, I do. We carried on this way for a back and forth. Some of you have probably seen it in my books or in my Q&A CDs or whatever it is. And I said to him, when you say there's such a thing as evil, aren't you assuming there's such a thing as good? He said, yes. I said, when you assume there's such a thing as good, aren't you assuming there's such a thing as a moral law by which to differentiate between good and evil? You must have a point of reference by which to differentiate between good and evil. He sort of hooed and hawed about that a bit, and I gave him the illustration of Bertrand Russell debating the Jesuit philosopher Frederick Copleston. When Copleston said to him, Mr. Russell, how do you differentiate between good and bad? Russell said, the same way I differentiate between blue and green. Copleston said, wait a minute, you differentiate between blue and green by seeing, don't you? He said, yes. How do you differentiate between good and bad? And here's this brilliant mathematician philosopher. Do you know what his answer was? On the basis of my feeling. What else? Well, Copleston was kind. Had I been there, I'd been very tempted to say, Mr. Russell, in some cultures they love their neighbors, in other cultures they eat them. Do you have a personal feeling about which is better of these two? See, when you say there's evil, there's good. When you say there's good, there's a moral law, and he granted that. I said, but if you assume there's a moral law, you must posit a moral lawgiver, but that's whom you're trying to disprove and not prove. If there's no moral lawgiver, there's no moral law. If there's no moral law, there's no good. If there's no good, there's no evil. What is your question? He stood there, looked at me, and said, what then am I asking you? I knew what he was asking me, But I was just trying to remind him, logically, this is a chaotic question as much for the questioner as it is for the one being questioned. There is no absolute morality without God. So if the question is meaningful, God has to remain within the paradigm. If there is no God, it's a meaningless, emotive question. It is not logically consistent. So logically, you have to evaluate the question, and God has to remain in the paradigm. Number two, if that is the case, then we have to realize that what has ultimately brought evil and suffering in this world is our departure from God. Sin is a violation of purpose. We have departed from Him, and the solidarity of our humanity has that ripple effect where it comes upon all of us: pain, suffering, anguish. And when we come back to Him, we come back to Him by faith and by His grace in order to sustain us and give us that day-to-day strength. So if you are suffering as a person, as a questioner, I just say to you, first remember what Chesterton said: when belief in God becomes difficult, the tendency is to turn away from Him. But in heaven's name, to what? When belief in God becomes difficult, the tendency is to turn away from Him. In heaven's name, to what? What paradigm are we going to turn to answer this question? Are we going to say it doesn't matter or it's not real? So I give you two illustrations, what I want to sustain you with here. Annie Johnston Flint was one of the greatest hymn writers. If you read her biography, it's called The Making of the Beautiful, written by Roland Bingham. She was born as Annie Johnston. Shortly after that was orphaned and raised by the Flint family, and so she's known to the world as Annie Johnston Flint. She suffered a lot in her life. She got rheumatoid arthritis till she was twisted up in bed for many, many decades. She had cancer inside of her. She was incontinent and lived on diapers, and blindness started to overtake her. She was a beautiful hymn writer, and one of the most beautiful hymns she wrote, Roland Bingham said before she died, from head to toe, there were so many boils and marks on her body from lying in bed that she needed 8 pillows just to cushion her body. And she wrote this: He giveth more grace when the burdens grow greater. He sendeth more strength when the labors increase. To added affliction He addeth His mercy. To multiplied trials His multiplied peace. When we have exhausted our store of endurance, when our strength has failed ere the day is half done, when we reach the end of our hoarded resources, our Father's full giving has only begun. His love has no limit, His grace has no measure, His power has no boundaries known unto men. For out of His infinite riches in Jesus, He giveth and giveth and giveth again. The grace of God that sustains you will be the testimony that will carry you ultimately to the end of the day. And you know what? This is not a cakewalk. I would never have dreamed that I would have to live with the kind of ailment that I'm living with right now. But when I injured it, I little realized how it was going to change my life. So I want to give you this little positive illustration, and then may I recommend you get our book called Why Suffering? I've co-authored it with my colleague from Oxford, Vince Vitale. He is a brilliant writer. Vince has some insights into this that are so good, and he's just a powerful, his PhD is in philosophy from Oxford University. He's on our faculty at the Oxford Center for Christian Apologetics. So the Zacharias and Vitale, Why Suffering? We go through several angles into this. About 3 summers ago, I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and one of my friends from Singapore, his name is Du Eng Seng. He was the CEO of Gillette for Asia Pacific. He's a very fine man. And Du phoned me and said, Brother Ravi, are you going to be in town tomorrow? I'm in Atlanta. I'd love to see you. I said, Du, I'm leaving tomorrow for 5 weeks. I'd love to see you too, but really, I'm not going to be here after midday. I've got to be flying out. He said, Ravi, I have to see you. I thought, oh, brother, something's wrong. I said, all right, I'll meet you for a quick breakfast. It'll be 30 minutes, and then I have to go back home, pick up my bags, and leave. He said, that's fine. So we met at a little pancake house type place. We ordered the pancakes, and they sat there in front of us. We never even touched them. He said, you know, Ravi, I wake up every morning, and I've had a habit. Before I wash up and get on my knees for my formal time of prayer, I lie in bed for about 30 minutes, and I just say this, Lord, speak to me if there's anything you want me to do to prepare for this day. And he said, I lie there. He said, yesterday being in Atlanta, you were so much on my mind. And he said, and you came to my mind. And I said, Lord, is there any word you want me to give my brother Ravi? He said, and God spoke to me, and that's why I wanted to see you. Boy, that scared me. Never had anything happen like this. He looked at me and he said, God told me in my thinking there to tell you that the anointing on your life in the years to come will be greater than the years that have gone by. I just looked at him. I said, you sure the Lord told you this? He said, yes, my brother. He said, but then he told me something, and that's why I wanted to see you. He said, tell Ravi he will still have a lot of struggles and challenges physically, but I'm going to take care of him 3, 4, 5. He said, Lord, I don't know what you mean. He said, you tell Ravi, he'll know what I mean. I'm here to tell you the Lord said you'll have many challenges, but he's going to take care of you 3, 4, 5. Does that mean anything to you? I said, for the last 28 years, I have lived with a broken back, and it came about by the herniation of L3-4 and L4-5. And I'm straddled from L3 to S1, those bolts in me. So when you say 3, 4, 5, all I can think of is L3, 4 and L4, 5. He started crying. He said, I knew nothing of what the spine is like. He said, where is this? So I told him, just above that belt line. He put his hand on my back and he prayed for me. I've been prayed for many times. I've got all the oils in the world that can be tested, you know. So if you're sending me any, please send it to somebody else who might need it. I've got all the oils that I need. You know. I'm joking about that. I've appreciated those who've tried to help me. He prayed. I went back home and I was hurriedly trying. You know, I couldn't even bend down. I can't lift a suitcase. I can't lift a bag. So I traveled with my colleague. And I told Margie, I said, honey, something happened this morning, but I don't want you to tell anybody. Don't tell anybody. Here's what happened. She said, oh, wow. So we left. My colleague, Crin, who was here till today, took ill and he's flown back to Atlanta. He came, picked me up, went to the airport, went around, and next airport, we're checking, going through security, and after security, I'd get on my knees and tie my shoelace because I could not cross my legs. If I did this, just pull, and I'd be limping for days. Without even thinking, I sat on a chair, crossed my leg, and started to tie my shoelace. And he looked at me and said, what are you doing? From that day till now, I have never had any pain in my back. Just amazing. Am I nervous that it might return? Or ye of little faith? Do I have tightness? I have to be careful? But Thomas travels with me, and I'll tell you, I do naughty things. I'll pick up my suitcase, pick up my bags, put them up there. I'll do all kinds of things. I just say, Lord, if you've really healed me, I need to at least be able to put my briefcase up on the top out there. I don't know what it means, but I just want to tell you, God works on a timetable. He didn't come for Lazarus when they wanted him to come for Lazarus. He said, this is done that the work of God might be displayed about the blind man whom he healed. If you're struggling with a personal physical malady, God works with a timetable, and don't be shocked if one day he meets you in that need and you are well again. It may be that the ultimate translation will come into his very presence. I can't guarantee how it'll work. I can only tell you, as a Christian apologist who lives with so much thought, my heart has been strangely warmed by the miracle of his healing 28 years after my injury with that back. He works on a timetable. His grace is sufficient to To raise the question without him makes the question moot. So to make the question consistent and find his grace sufficient and work with this timetable, you can become a shining light even in your pain to a world that's desperately looking for examples in that. One man told me, and I close with this, he said to me, when you're looking to be mentored and discipled, look to somebody who has suffered much and whose faith in God has remained unshaken. Those are the mentors I look for. So that's my answer to this person. Maybe we can take one more. I don't know how this goes.
All right.